Okay, I'm starting the second part, which is the lab part. So the first part, which is the lecture part, is kind of more dry stuff. Just talk about the concepts. What is a use case diagram? What is a use case? Why you guys really need to focus on the what, not the how part. Okay, you guys doing okay back there?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to pass around the row sheet. I forgot to do it last Wednesday, so I'm going to do it today, just to keep track of who is here. So I start here. Make sure that you put your initial next to your name and also today's date, because today is the second column. So do not worry about the first column. Just start with the second column. Okay. All right. So I'm starting to program 2 USB dongles. Okay, so if anyone want me to do that to your USB dongle, just let me have it. It will take about 10 minutes for each one, so I'm going to time myself at about 10:50. I will take a look and see how these two are doing. Okay. All right. So what I want to do right now is to show you guys App Inventor. Because even though I don't want you to actually do anything with your projects, I want you to start exploring. Okay, because you cannot really work on it until you know what type of things can be done with App Inventor. So I want to give you an idea of what you can do with App Inventor. All right, so it doesn't really matter which account I use. For those of you who have multiple accounts, multiple Gmail accounts, you can use any one of those accounts. You just have to be consistent. You just have to say, okay, if I use this one, I'm going to use it consistently. Okay. And because I'm using an emulator, if you use an emulator for development, the first thing you have to do is to start the emulator working first. Okay. So in my case, because I'm using Linux, it's a little bit more cumbersome than just double-clicking on an icon. If you're using Windows and you install the emulator package, it gives you an icon that you can just double-click and it will start the emulator. For me, it's a little bit more clunky. I have to go to a particular path and go to the folder that has the actual command to do it, and start AI starter, the program itself. And it doesn't say much. Okay, in Windows, you will see a text box that will say exactly the same thing. It will say model server starting up, blah blah blah, and it will say the last line is hit Control-C to quit, and then it won't say any more. Okay, because right now it is waiting for App Inventor to try to talk to it, and that's why it doesn't say anything. So switching back to the browser, which is now already running App Inventor, I go to Connect, okay, and I just say, in this case, I'm using Emulator. For those of you who use AI Companion, which is a wireless way to hook up to an actual mobile device, you can select the first option, but it does require you to have AI Companion, the app, installed on the mobile device. The App Inventor website has step-by-step instruction for each way to write your program and to test your program. So if you have any questions about that, you can ask me in class. During the lab time, I can help you out, or you can read the documentation on this website, so you can just get your mobile device connected to App Inventor. Are there any questions at this point about how to get started with App Inventor? Okay. If there are no questions, I'm going to start up the emulator. All right. And it takes a while. It depends on how fast is your processor. For later processors with hardware acceleration for virtualization, it will start up fairly quick. Like this computer, it's not bad. If you have an older computer that does not have hardware acceleration for virtualization, it can be a little bit sluggish. Okay, it can be a little bit slow. Just give it some time to get started. So what we'll do today is focusing more on the user interface. I'll just kind of point out that's the Hello Perl program running. So I just want to show you, the user interaction elements, just a little bit, so that you guys know, how to design the front end of your application. And it is starting up. And because I already updated the other side, it doesn't ask me for an update anymore. For those of you who were here or watched the video, you know that you have to go through one update because the emulator included is kind of out of date. Okay. So right now the app is actually running. I can click proceed, and but the program doesn't do a single thing, because when you look at the program, which is on this side, now this is the user interface. Okay, this is the kind of the what you see is what you get WYSIWYG part of the design. The actual code is in blocks. So if you click blocks, it will show you the code of the program. Okay, the actual logic behind everything. And what do we see here? Nothing, because I haven't done a single thing. Is that okay? All right. So assuming that you have either taken cisp 300 or you are taking cisp 300 this semester, let's start with something that is kind of essential as the first part of those classes. A variable. Okay? What is a variable in any type of programming class? What does it do? Okay, well, it's something that can store a value. Okay, typically a number, a name, or something like that. Okay, and you're correct. A variable itself has a name, so that you can refer to a particular variable as opposed to that variable or this variable. It has a name. It has a value. Okay. Next question is, can the value of a variable change over the course of execution of a program? The answer is yes. Okay, and that's why it's called a variable and not a constant, because it can be changed, it can vary. So the first thing we'll do is to say, okay, but how do we create a variable? Without my instruction, just looking at the screen here, what do you think is related to a variable? Exactly, it's spelled out. Okay, very good. So you click on the variable tab, I suppose, and it will give you things that you can do, okay? Blocks that you can put into the program itself. So I'll just kind of go through each one, a little bit, and talk about it a little bit. The first one is initialize global name to blah blah blah. It's doing both. It's doing both the declaration of a global variable, which basically means yes, I do need a global variable with this name. It's doing that. And the initialization at the same time, because you can set a particular value to this global variable. Okay? Why do I need global variables or variables of any kind when I'm writing programs? Just give me an example. Like this application here. Why do I need variables?
To hold the number of attempts.
To keep track of stuff, right? So in this case, I need to keep track of which lane I'm in. Within that lane, which target am I shooting at right now? With that target, am I doing the first attempt or the second attempt? And whether it is a hit or a miss. Okay, so most of those things require some kind of a variable to store. Okay, so right now we are focusing on what we call singleton variables, which stores a single particular value. It's not anything that's complex or structural. But later on, we'll start to talk about stuff that is actually structural. So I'm going to write a very simple application. The only thing it does, has anyone gone to Costco? There's a person at the entrance, and what does that person do? With a clicker. Okay, so they check your membership and clicks, right? And what is the clicker? Exactly, it's a counter, right? It's really just a counter. Every time you click, the counter goes up. Okay, there's a button probably somewhere to reset the counter, but that person is just clicking and counting how many people are coming in. So let's just say that we want to write an app to do that. It's a waste of electricity to do something like that with an app, but we are going to do that. Okay, we'll just write an app to do that. So what do you think is one of the things that you need to do, or one of the variables that you would need for an app like that? Is a counter application. A counter, right? You need a counter to keep track of the count. So I'm going to use a global variable for that. We'll talk about local variables later. And the first thing we want to do with a global variable is not to use the generic name. Okay, because otherwise you don't know what your variable is for, right? So in our application as a clicker, how should I name this global variable? counter. Okay, counter is a great name for them. Okay. So counter, and how should I initialize counter?
0.
To 0, very good. Now one thing that unfortunately the screen is, the projection screen doesn't show the bottom part, so I'm going to have to resize it a little bit just so I can show that. I'm going to shrink the screen a little bit so that I can show the entire screen to the whole class. So if you scroll a little bit to the bottom, oh no, I don't have to scroll at all. It resizes automatically. See this little symbol here? It's a triangle in yellow with an exclamation point in the middle. What does that sign usually say?
Caution.
Caution, warning, right? Not quite, fatal stuff like somebody just died, okay? But it's something that you might want to pay attention to. Next to that thing is a number 1. What do you think that means? There's one thing that you should pay attention to, okay? One thing that you might want to fix, okay? It is by itself not a big problem, okay? It's not a big problem, but it can potentially be a problem. So what you should do is to click on it and show the warning. Okay, so I'm clicking on show warning, and once you click show warnings, it will display that icon to whatever thing in your program that is potentially having a problem. Since we only have one block at this point, it must be the only one having a problem. Okay? Then what do? It just says, this may be a problem. But what is the problem? Click it. Okay? And you click it, it says you should fill all the sockets with blocks. What is a socket? What is not being filled? See this little notch here? That's a socket. Okay? If you have a block on your screen that has a socket, but nothing is connecting to the socket, this warning comes up because right now this global variable is not initialized. It does not have an initial value, which means when you start your application, the global variable counter has no particular value. Okay, that's usually a bad thing. So you always want to keep your variables initialized. Okay, how should I initialize it to? It's a counter, which means it's probably a number of some kind. So just looking at the screen right now, can someone give me a suggestion of where to go next to get my global variable initialized?
Math.
Math, okay, because out of these things, math is the closest one to numbers, right? So you click on math, it gives you some options. Unfortunately, I have to shrink the screen, so it takes a little bit of scrolling. But I don't even have to scroll right now. Which one should I pick out to initialize counter? The first one, okay? How do you know, hey, that's the one that I want? Do you see the little tab on the left-hand side? It matches the shape of the socket. That is how we're going to write programs this entire semester in this class. Drag, drop, snap. Drag, drop, snap. Okay? To those of you who already know programming and have done some programming in C and C++, and I know who you are, this is going to be tedious. Okay? A little bit, okay? But it does have higher level features like functions and subroutines and stuff like that. So at some point, it's not going to be really too bad. You can still do a lot of really, really useful programming using this simple interface. But for now, we'll just take, okay, I'm going to take this one, drag it out. Now, if you don't put it into the right place, it doesn't snap, okay? So what you need to do is to drag it and make sure that it snaps. And once it snaps, what happened to my warnings? They all went away, okay? Because now it is connected. This global variable is initialized. Are we kind of doing okay so far at this point? Okay. With a clicker app, what do I need for the user interface of the application?
A button.
I need a button, right? I need a way to actuate the thing and say that yes, one more count, please. Okay. So then we can interactively switch back to the designer. I do have one button right now. It says proceed. I don't think this is the right label. Okay. So let's go ahead and change the label so it doesn't say proceed anymore. There are quite a few places that you have to make changes to. Okay. Excuse me, sir. No eating in class, please. Thank you. So you can go to this tab here. Okay, it's called Properties. Everything that you put into the application is going to have some kind of properties. Things that are related to that thing, like with a button, you can change what is in the button itself. You can change the text, you can change the font of the text, you can change the size of the text, and so on. Okay? But exactly what can I do about a button? Well, go through the property list and find out what we can do. Okay? So with this class, a lot of stuff is something that you can explore on your own. Okay? It's not something that I have to explain every single little thing. Certain things are kind of tricky and I will explain, but other things, hey, you know what? You can just go ahead and explore and find out. Okay, so within this property here, you can have enable versus not enable. If it is not enabled, people cannot click it. It can still be seen, but it's not interactive. The default state is enabled, but there might be cases where you have to disable it. Okay, you go through this. There's a font size here, okay, which just controls how big of a font we're dealing with. You also have control over the typeface. Okay, so there's sans serif, serif with tail, monospace, and so on. So I'm just going to use the default here. You can control the height of a button. Right now it is on automatic. When it's on automatic, it simply means that based on whatever font you're picking, it will just use the minimum amount of space for that particular text with a little bit of margin, so it is not all the way to the edge. Okay. You can also do other things. If you don't want automatic, you can specify fill parent, okay, which is whatever is enclosing this particular button. Well, tell me what is enclosing this button right now.
Screen 1.
The whole screen, screen 1. So if I pick fill parent, the button will be as big as the entire screen. Okay, if that's what you want, you can do it that way. You can also specify in pixels or in percentage of the parent. So if I want this to fill up half the screen, I can click this option and say 50%, click OK, and now the button is going to take up half the screen. Okay, are there any questions? So depending on what app you are writing and how you want to size and position things, you can play with these options so that it looks right, in your eyes. Okay. Keep going. With same thing, we have automatic, we have fill parent, which takes up the entire width of the screen, which is what it is now. You can also specify in pixels, number of pixels, and also percentage. I'm not going to change this one. Shape, you have rounded, rectangular, oval, and so on. So if you want to give it a different look, that's an oval shape. So typically, default is fine. It doesn't really change the functionality. Show feedback. Okay, so that means you can display some text when it is hovered over. So please counter by 1. That's the text that I wanted to display. Alignment of the text, it can be centered, it can be left, it can be right. Okay, so right now I'm using centered. Text color, once again, you can pick in one of these colors. Visible, now this is the important part. Visibility of something is independent to enabling. If I turn off enable, it is still seen, except people cannot click it anymore. Okay. And I did change the text inside the box. Okay, if you want to change it back, to something else, you can. Are there any questions? Any questions about the properties of a button of your app? I have a question. What if I want it to be a picture and not text? Because sometimes the picture is more appropriate. What do you think? Well, just look at the screen right now. Image, exactly. So what you can do is you can upload a bitmap. It can be a JPEG file, it can be a GIF, it can be a PNG file. Okay, so upload an image. Then you have choices, and you can say, I want that bitmap to be on this button. Okay, which can be helpful. Okay, depending on what you're doing with your app, this can be more intuitive than just text on the button itself. Okay, so I'll leave it up to you guys to play with this. I think Hello Per actually makes use of that. Okay, so that's why most of you probably have played with that already. Okay, so a button is a button is a button. Okay, so there's no big deal. Now let's take a look at the components pane. Okay, the components tab or pane, which is basically a portion of the screen, tells you how things are arranged structurally speaking. In other words, what is containing what else. So right now we can see that screen 1 is the overall container. It contains proceed button. But wait, this is not our proceed button, it is our counter button, right? So you can change the name, and the way you change the name is you go down here and you just click rename when the element is selected. So when the component is selected, like this one here, you can go to here, just click rename, and now you can give it a new name. Okay, and I can just say count up button. Okay, there we go. All right, so now we have an application. Let's go ahead and just run the application right now. Okay, and how do we test an application again? We switch to the emulator. Exactly. If you have AI Companion installed and using that approach, the application is constantly getting updated as you specify, as you change the program. So right now the program is working. I can click the button, but nothing is happening. Okay, the global variable is actually initialized, but how do I see it? There's nothing displayed on screen. Okay, all right, so there are a few ways to do it now. One way to do it is you can have the button itself reflecting the number, the value of the global variable. That's one way. You can have a label to display that as well. Okay, so you can have a label that is different from the button itself to show you the current counter value. That works too. How do you guys want to do it? I'll let you guys choose.
Label.
The label, okay, so a separate label. Okay, so we'll do it with a separate label. And that's easy. You go to the selection of all the things that you can do, and then you pick up a label, you drag it over to the viewer pane, and just drop it, okay? Now, depending on where you drop it, it can be before a particular component, it can be after a particular component. After you drop it off, you can still change it if you want to. You can just drag and drop. Let's see. I think there's a way to reorder. Maybe it's here. There we go. Can't seem to reorder that. There we go. So you can drag it at the very edge, and you can still reposition stuff, after the fact. So if you drag it in and it's at the wrong place, just fix it later. Would this be a good place for a label? And why is it the case? Either yes or yes not. It's not a good place, and why not? When people push a button, the hand will be blocking the label. So you always want the label to be on top of a button if you want the label to be visible when someone is pressing the button. Okay? So that's why this is not a good place to display the actual count, because when the person is clicking the button, probably that person wants to see what is the current count. Okay? The font is really small as well. Okay, so we want to use a bigger font, and guess where do we go to change the font of the label? Properties. Okay, so you just go to the properties pane, and now because the label 1 is being selected, we are looking at properties of label 1. If you want to change the background color, you can go ahead and change it. Font size is 14, way too small. Okay, I want to increase it so that the person who's doing the clicking can see very clearly. 28. Okay, and you can see this is WYSIWYG, and guess what? If you go back to the emulator, it is reflected right away. So as you make changes to the user interface, as you make changes to the logic of the program, the app is constantly getting updated, which is great because it makes running and testing a program interactive. There's no button to push to say build and upload and stuff like that. It is really, really just intuitive. Okay, you make changes, it is automatically updated. Okay, which is good because if you say 28 point font is not enough, just make it bigger. Okay, so let's go here, make it 35. Okay, make it even bigger. Okay. You can also change what it displays initially. Text for label 1 may not be the best thing to do, so we can just leave it blank. Okay, you can leave it blank, which is kind of odd because it doesn't really show anything. If there's no text whatsoever, it doesn't take up any space because the height is on automatic mode. Well, maybe that's not what we want anymore. Maybe we want to specify, I want this to use up 30% of the screen space. So now it is always going to use up 30% of screen space, regardless of whether anything is in it or not. Okay, is that okay so far? So the percentage is really good from the perspective of you can do some kind of layout control using the percentages. Okay, all right. So now I have this app here. Click the button. Nothing is happening. It doesn't even show a 0 here. What is going on? I didn't specify anywhere to display the value of global variable counter using that label. So I have to do that somewhere. Okay. Let's go to blocks and find out, how do we do something? Okay, when the app first starts up and I want to do certain things, how do we make that happen? Go to blocks. Okay. And right now we have a global variable, which is all by itself. It is initialized to 0 when this app starts up, but no one is linking the value of counter to the label so that the label displays the value of counter. So where do I do something to control, hey, when this application starts up, do this first, okay? Where do you think I should look? This time I think I do need to scroll a little. There we go. Okay, so the built-in blocks, okay, on this part here, these are the things that you can drag and drop, at any moment, but there's no association with other stuff on the screen. Okay, see this part here? It says screen 1, label 1, count up button. Those are displaying stuff that you have already placed onto the screen. So let's go ahead and click on screen 1 and see what options is available with screen 1. When you click screen 1, it shows you all the blocks that you can drag into the program that are related to screen 1. Okay? When you see a block that starts with when blah 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 do something, it's an event. Okay? This is called an event, which is something that the program itself cannot control. An event is generated when someone is clicking on the program. Okay, when someone presses a button, when someone starts an application, when someone scrolls, when someone types something in a text box, it's basically when something happens. Okay, that's called an event. Event happens all the time. Even right now, if I click the button, the event itself is generated, but there's no event handler to actually do something about it. So these blocks are basically event handlers to basically say when something happens, we can specify what to do. And right now, I'm going to use this one. It says when screen 1 initialized, okay, which is basically an event when this program runs the first time. Okay, when it first starts up, I want these things done. Okay, and what can I specify here? I want to do something about label 1. I want label 1 to show me the value of the global variable counter. Okay. And how do you think we're going to do that? just looking at the screen right now, okay, where do I go to say that I want label 1 to be updated to this particular value? What do you think it would be related? Just out of the what you see on the projector right now. Any idea? Logic. Okay, now this is what we call object-oriented programming. In other words, we identify the object, the thing that is responsible for what we want to do next. What are we planning to do again? We want label 1 to be updated. That is the object. Okay, that is the object. So in object-oriented programming, you always think about what is the object that is being changed. Okay, what is the object that is that is interacting with what we want to do? It's label 1. So now we have all the things that we can do with label 1, which is a lot. Okay, all of the properties that we saw earlier, like background color, font size, and stuff like that, they can all be changed when the program runs. Okay, so you can dynamically change the size of the font, the background color, and stuff like that when your program is running. But that's not what I want right now. I just want the text to be changed. So you scroll a little bit, and eventually you will find set label 1 dot text to something, which is this block here. Okay, I just want to drag it to the side first because you can see how the notch on the top of set label 1 matches the little tab in the when screen 1 initialize block. Do you see all that? Okay, let me point out where I'm talking about. See this little tab here and this little notch here? They match, which basically means these two can snap together. Okay. But we do have one warning and one error message. Okay, the red rectangle means something needs to be fixed. Okay, and it says right here invalid syntax in eval form, so something has to be fixed because this property is missing something. All right, so what do we do? We're missing something here. It says set label 1 dot text to something. What are we setting it to? The value of counter variable, and counter is a variable. So we go to the variable tab, and then we say get the value of a particular variable. Okay, there's a drop-down box here. It will show you all the possible options. So if you have a whole bunch of global variables already declared in your program, it will show you all the options. So you just have to choose which one do you want to use, whose value do you want to use to initialize the text of label 1. In this case, since we only have one single global variable at this point, that has to be the answer. Is that okay? If I switch back to the application, what should I see right now? How many people think that we should see 0 as the label? Okay. How many people think we should not see anything at all? Because the program has been running all along. This is not the first time we started the program. So this block actually doesn't get triggered. Because the program has been running all along. We're just making changes to the program that is already running. This code only runs the first time you start the app from the tray. Once the program is running, any additional changes won't trigger this. So we'll double check. Is that really the case? Go back to the program here. It is actually running, but it doesn't show the 0 because the program is already running. We missed the first chance of getting that block to execute. Are we still doing okay so far with this application? Okay. So there's really not a whole lot you can do about that except to disconnect and then restart the emulator, which is kind of a chore, but you can do it. Okay. So I'll go ahead and do it. Okay. So we can now go back to App Inventor, go to connect, and just say, okay, let's reset the connection, which kills the emulator and then we have to go to connect again and say, okay, let's start all over again. So this will take a while because it's just really restarting the whole thing, but this time it should show 0 because the initialization block should now be triggered. So we'll give it a little bit of time to do this. If you have not signed in with your initial, I'm going to pass this a second time. Who has not signed in on the row sheet? Okay, so I will just go ahead and pass it around. So you remember to sign in. And this is all getting recorded too, so I'm going to upload everything to YouTube afterwards. I think for a class like this, it is particularly important to record everything because it's so interactive. So we're getting there, just a little bit more. There we go. We get the 0. Great. Excellent. So now we go to this app and go like click, 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 click. Nothing happens. Why? I haven't said anything about what to do with the button, right? The button is now, it's interactive, it's enabled, but I didn't specify anything about what should be done when the button is clicked. But I think you guys already know kind of what we need to do, right? We go to the blocks here, and what do you think we need to do next? Go to button 1, right? Go to the start count up button, which requires a little bit of scrolling right here. Count up button. Click it, and that shows you all the events that can be handled related to the button. Okay, you can have get focus. Is that what we want to do? Get focus? No. Long click? Well, maybe we will reserve for something later. Okay, maybe resetting the counter can use the long click, but normally when people just click on a button, it's just click, which is the first option. Okay, so what you do is you drag the block that you want to use and just put it into the program itself. Okay, you can put it here. It will automatically. Well, you can just have because of the way I zoom in. There's not a whole lot of workspace for me. But when you're doing this on the large screen, you have plenty of space to put in a lot of blocks and not having to scroll a lot. Okay, so now I'm going to specify what to do when count up button is clicked. What should I do? There are two things. What should I do first? Increase the number by 1. Okay, and what should I do first? Where do I go first to set it up? Go to variables, and which one of these blocks do you think is related to what we want to do? Set. Exactly. We're changing it. Okay, and there's a drop-down box here because we can specify which variable we are changing. What are we changing it to? 1 more than what it is currently at, right? And that would involve math. Very good. Because we are doing addition, so we just dash addition here. What are we adding together? There are 2 things that we need to specify. The first one is the counter itself, right? So we can go to variables again, go to get, and say, go get the current value of global variable counter. And what are we adding to global variable counter? 1, which is in math as a constant. Okay. You can always change it, when you click on it. There we go. So people who are used to typing and say counter equals counter plus 1, or better yet for C++ programmers, plus counter, I'm sorry, in this class, you have to drag and drop. There's no easy way to get around that one, okay? All right, go back to the app. If I click, do you think anything will change here?
No.
It's not going to change because there's no direct link between those two. The global variable counter is on its own, it's a little counter, hidden somewhere else. The label has no direct link to the value of counter. So whenever you update counter, you will have to remember to update the label. So what we need to do is to replicate the code that we already have here. Okay, we can do all the drag and dropping, which takes a little bit of time. I'm not going to do that. What do you think I'm going to do? Duplicate, right? Copy and paste. Right click, duplicate, drag it here. Well, has it snapped?
Yes.
I'm not so sure. Yeah, it does. Okay, because you can see from the outer block that it has snapped. Okay, so now the program has the button doing that one thing, which is increasing it by 1, and then update the label so that the label is now the updated value. Let's check it out. Okay, see if the program is doing what it is supposed to. It does work. Great. Well, maybe at some point we want to reset that counter to 0, right? Well, we can use another button to do that, okay? Or we can use the long press of whatever we have here to reset the counter. Okay, so I'm going to use that approach. In other words, you can use the same button, but use a different event of that button to do something else. So I go back to count up button, but this time I select this block. Okay, I'm going to scroll down to show you exactly what it is. So this time it is a long click, which means you have to keep pressing on the button for, I don't remember how long, but maybe a second or so. Then it will register as a long click, which is different from a regular click. That's the most important part, because you don't want the same thing to register as a long click and a regular click, because then it will trigger both blocks. In this case, I just want one block to be triggered, which is long click. And I want to reset it to 0. And of course, I'm lazy. If I don't have to drag and drop all day long, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to take this entire thing, duplicate, put it here, except this time I don't need to go through all the computation. I just need a constant of 0. In fact, we have something else that's already exactly doing that. And what I don't need, I can put into the trash can. Okay? And we'll go ahead and drag and drop this one too, or duplicate it, just like that. So now I have the long click event of the button doing what I wanted to do. I wanted to reset the value of the counter, change it back to 0, and then update the label. Because if I don't update the label, it will still show the previous value, which is confusing. Okay. Let's go back and check the app. Okay, we click, 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 long click, it reset to 0. So everything is working. If I were to do this really as an app, I would change the label of the button. So I would go to the designer tab and go back to the button and change the description just a little bit so it's clear. So it will be click to count up, long press, long click to reset. I'm not sure whether you can have a line feed here. Nope, nope, you cannot. It doesn't take a line feed, so it will just kind of it will break it up when it runs out of width space, but it doesn't really do it automatically. So are there any questions about this this little app here? Yep.
What if you wanted to create just a reset button?
If you want to create a reset button, you just drag a new button into the whole user interface, and then use the click event of the reset button to reset the counter. Any questions? What happens when I turn off the mobile device? What happens to the counter? It's gone. Well, it's gone first, okay? Because the next time you start the app, it's resetting everything back to 0. Okay? So there might be occasions where you want the application to remember, okay, a particular thing from the last time you used the app. Does it make sense to you? And yet we are not quite ready to hook up to the web or hook up to the cloud to store something in the cloud. So we just want to store something on the device itself, like in this case, the current count. Okay, the next time I start the app, I want to have the option. Do I want to reset it to 0? Because I can now reset it to 0 just by long clicking the button. Or do I want to retrieve the value from last time? Is that making any sense? Okay. So what I want to do is now to point out what feature offered by App Inventor can do exactly that. So if you look at this, this part, they're all about the user interface. So nothing here is going to help us with this part. But if you keep scrolling down, you can go to storage and click it. And under storage, there are several things. File is kind of an overkill, okay? To save the number to a particular file is kind of an overkill. It's a little bit complicated to do it too, so we're not going to do it that way. Fusion tables is kind of interesting because Fusion table is actually a Google feature. So if you have a Fusion table created under your Gmail username, you can have this app to hook up to the Fusion table, which is a database kind of thing, but the kind of query you can run is kind of limited, okay? But that gives you the option of being able to store something into a database, okay? Which is kind of big. That's kind of important. That's not what we're going to do here. We'll use TinyDB. DB stands for database, but it really is not a database. You can just look at it as persistent storage. But to use it, you need to drag it into the user interface, which doesn't seem to make sense because we are not dealing with a user interface thing. This is something that is hidden in the back end, but this is still what you need to do. But what it does is it doesn't show up on the screen itself. It shows up as a hidden or non-visible component because it is not visible. It is something that is already in your program right now, but it's not visible. It doesn't show anything on the screen. Okay. But now, when we switch to blocks and scroll down a little bit, you can see TinyDB1 is now one of the components that we can actually see and utilize. Okay. So what we want to do is now say, well, I want to be able to save the current count, okay? So that next time when I start the application, I can retrieve that. Is that okay? Because that's what I want to do. All right. So you click on TinyDB1. That will give you a list of things that you can do with TinyDB1. You can clear all the values. You can clear a tag. I will talk about that a little bit later. You can get all the tags, which are basically the name of all the things that you have stored in TinyDB. You can get the value of a particular tag. You can store the value to a particular tag, and you can just refer to TinyDB1 itself, which is not helpful at this point. Okay, so we have all of these things that we can do. All right. So maybe I don't want to store to the TinyDB1 every single time I increase the count. Maybe I just want to do it when I'm ready to exit the application. Okay, when I hit the back button to exit the application, that's when I want to save the current count. Okay. What do you think I need to look in order to specify that logic? Screen 1, exactly. Very good. Okay, so we go to screen 1 and we investigate what type of event we can deal with. Okay. So back pressed, okay, that's what we want. But we can just look at all the other ones too. Orientation change. So back pressed is the one that we want to do. Okay, so we drag out this block here, and you can stash it on the side too. You can scroll horizontally. You can see that one potential problem with writing programs this way is when your program gets complicated, to make space to expand one particular block can be a chore. Okay, I can tell you by experience that it is kind of a chore because you have to move everything else around. It's not like you can just insert a line and all the other lines will be like moved. You actually have to pick up a lot of stuff, move it around just to give you enough space. Okay. So when screen 1 back pressed, okay, which means you're clicking the back button on your device, we want to specify a few things there. We want to go to TinyDB1 and say that, hey, I want to store the current counter value to the TinyDB. So now we go take a look at this block here. Okay, I know this is the block that I want. I just need to specify what tag to use and what value to use to store. The value to store is easy because it's really just my global variable counter. Just like that. What is the tag? Well, the tag is nothing more than just a name or an identifier of the value that you're storing. You can pick whatever you want, okay? But you want to name it, kind of after what you're actually storing. So maybe counter is a good name in this case because that really is the value, the name of the variable. But it doesn't have to be. Okay, just has to be unique. So in this case, I want to use it's text basically. It's text, and you can just pick out this block here and specify the name of the tag, which is counter. Okay, are there any questions about what I have just done here? Okay, remember a tag is a string. Okay, it is not the value of counter itself. It is really just literally the name counter, C-O-U-N-T-E-R, and that's why it has to be a string thing and not a variable thing. If you use a variable thing, it's just going to get the value of counter, not the name itself, counter. Okay. Next thing we want to do when you press the back button, because when you do something like this, the default behavior of a back button disappears. What do you think normally happens when you press a back button for an application? It closes, right? But if you override the default behavior of the back button, it doesn't close the application anymore. Okay, so what you need to do is to manually put in close screen, the screen closing action, so that it actually closes the application. So we'll go ahead and do that, and it is a screen operation. So we go to screen 1. We scroll down this list here to find closing, which one will close the screen itself. And keep going, keep going, keep going. And it's not here. Or did I miss something? No, I take it back. It's under control. Okay. So under control, there is one block that will close the application. Open, close screen, right there. Okay. Now there are several things that seem to be related: closing the screen with a certain value, closing the application. So with this one, because this is the only screen, we can just close the application. What if your application has multiple screens? Then closing one screen does not close the application. It just goes back to the previous screen. Okay, but since we only have one screen in this application, closing should close the entire application. So we drag this block and we put it here. So this will save it. But when we start up, we don't want to put a 0 into the label anymore, right? Because we want to make use of this. We want to make use of the value that we have saved. So that means we also have to make changes to that portion of the program, which we put here. And this is what I said about having to move stuff around it, because we don't have space to do it. So we're going to move things around a little bit, like that. So this way, I don't want to set label1.text to get global counter anymore, because the first thing I want to do to initialize the counter is not to put a 0 into it. Okay, when the application starts, I want to retrieve the value that I have saved into tinydb1, so that I can put that value back into counter. Is that making any sense? Okay. So we go to variables. We say set counter, global variable counter, to a particular value. But what value? Well, let's check out db1, tinydb1. This time we use the get value block. Stash it here. Well, we still have some missing stuff here. So what we want to do is to first specify which tag, what is the name of the thing that we stored. What was the name that I used?
Counter.
Counter. Okay, so we have to remember to use counter. I'm not going to do the best practice at this point, because I want to focus on the concept of what we are doing here. So we go back to string, drag this block over here, and specify counter, which is the name. Now this one is important. Value tag not there. Okay, the value if tag not there, which means, what if this is the very first time we start up the application and there's no tag in tinydb1 to store the previous value? There's no such thing as previous value. How should I initialize it in that case? 0. Okay. So now you can take out the string, the empty string, and go to math, specify the constant 0, and just put it here. Okay. So now we have a application, but it's different from last time. Okay. So what I want to do to test this program is to first test whether it gets initialized to 0 or not. So what I will do is I'm going to reset the connection, which is basically turning off the virtual machine, and then restart it. Because this is the first time I start up, there should not be anything stored just yet, right? So I go to Emulator, takes a little bit of time, it will start it the first time, and I should see the number, the counter, or the label having a 0 in it, because there's nothing to retrieve from TinyDB1, and the default value is going to be 0. Are there any questions about all of this stuff? Nope. Okay. So give it a little bit of time. By the way, the virtual machine does store stuff in a persistent way. So if we did store something, it would retrieve it. It's counting down to 0 to start the connection application. Once that is started, it will actually make the connection, upload the actual application to the virtual machine, and run it. Okay. And this time it should display a 0, just like what we expected it to do. Okay. Next thing is we are going to count a few times. And then what do we do? What do we do to trigger the program to store that value? You guys remember? The back button, which is here. So we click it. Closing forms is not currently supported. Okay, it's not supported during development. Okay, so this is one of the things where it's convenient to do it this way, but there are little issues because it doesn't support the closing of the application. So what do we do in order to bypass this problem? Remember one of the things that I said last Wednesday? The APK file. Okay, so we actually have to install the application this time to run it to test its feature because the closing of the application is not supported when we're in the interactive debug mode. Okay, that's what that message is saying. Okay, so how do we do that? Now, this one is a little bit more complicated, but eventually I think most of us will have to learn how to do this. I'll do it the first time. You don't have to remember how to do it because I will do it multiple times. Okay, so what you do is there are two things to do. First of all, on the command line, I'll use a different window here. You have to run ADB, okay, which is Android. It's not debug, okay? The ADB stands for Android Development Bridge, I think, or Debug Bridge, okay? But it's a program to let you connect to the application on a command line level, okay? So I don't think ADB can be found here, so I have to supply the full path. I will figure out how to do it in Windows, okay? So don't worry about it. So ADB, okay, so this is the command. It shows you all the things you can do. So the first thing you want to do is to start it up. That's not the word to do it. Okay, I'm just going through the help here. I think it's start server or something. There we go, start server. See this one here? So the first command to run is start dash server, which will start up a particular program in the background that we cannot see. And the second thing we want to do is to say, okay, once it is started, do we see any device here? What do we see? Okay, let me move the window up a little bit so we can all see it a little bit better. Okay, so it shows emulator-5554 device, okay? Which means it has visibility. I have connection to the machine, to the virtual machine. ADB is really useful because there are a lot of things that you cannot normally do easily using the GUI. You can do it quite easily using ADB, like moving files around. Now, I'm not just talking about the emulator, I'm talking about actual Android devices. Okay? If you have, if you want to move files around, copy stuff from a PC to your Android device, ADB can be used for that. Okay? The only trouble is you have to learn the command line how to do it. Okay? All right, so now that we have connectivity, I switch back to this part here. I don't want to disconnect it because if I disconnect it, the virtual machine dies. Okay, so that's not, I'm not ready for that just yet. Okay, so what I want to do is, right, I want to do a build and get the APK file and save it onto the PC itself. Okay, so I'm going to select this option. So this will take a little bit of time because it's going to build the APK file depending on how many people are using App Inventor right now worldwide. Okay, it may take a long time, it may not take a long time. So whatever amount of time it takes, you cannot do a single thing about that. Okay, that's not too bad, and then it will prompt me and say where do I want to save that file. There we go. So I'm going to save the file to the usual place, and now it's saved. Okay, into my downloads folder. I switch back to the text window here. Go back to ADB, but I'm not going to specify devices anymore. This time I say install, and then I point it to the folder where the file is located. So this is moir1.apk. Okay. So I'm doing everything on the command line because I really don't have an option. This is what I have to do. Press the enter key. It will first upload the file, and then it will actually go through the installation process. If you try to do this to an actual Android device, you will have to enable developer options, okay, which is pressing the build number a whole bunch of times until it says, now you have enabled developer options. It says to fail because it's a read-only file system, and yet it says successful. So okay, it cannot remove the file, but it is already installed. Okay. Okay, good. Now we go back to the emulator, and the back button doesn't work anymore. But I can go to the menu, okay, because after all, and I can say stop this application. So the other side is going to complain because from the App Inventor perspective, it has just lost connection to the emulator. It's okay because I don't need that connection anymore. So now I go through the tray and see if I can find Moir as an application. What do we see? It's right here. So instead of having to go through AI Companion to maintain a constant communication to get the application to run, to test, it is now an installed application. Okay? So as an installed application, and this is just an Android device, you just click it and it starts up. Guess what? It displays 0 because nothing is stored. Now we can really test the program because we can just count it up a few times, click the back button, it should close the application. It does. The real test is this time. If I start the application again, what should it do? Should start with 7, right? All right, let's see if it does that. How many people are kind of convinced that it might start with 7? How many people want to shut down the entire virtual machine and start it all over again just to see whether it is still maintained? I want to do that. So instead of shutting it down properly, I'm just going to unplug it. Okay, that's really a hard shutdown because I just pull the battery out of the mobile device. There's a way to start up the virtual machine without using App Inventor. So for me, I have to go through this entire path thing. Okay, so there's a way to do this in Windows as well. So in this case, okay, I will let you guys make a suggestion. How do I start the emulator? Run emulator, exactly. So we just say run emulator, and it starts up the emulator. And you know what? At this point, I can shut down the browser because it's not really in any way connected to the browser anymore. This is just a standalone emulator running that has no relationship whatsoever to what I'm running in the browser. Okay. So now I can just swipe this, go to the tray, go find my application, which is moir.moir, click it to start it up, and I still see 7. So it does work. It works the way it's supposed to. Okay.
So the persistent storage is in the SIM card on the phone?
It is on the internal flash drive of your device.
Oh.
So you don't need a SIM card, you don't need to plug in anything. It is actually just the internal flash storage of your mobile device. So, but this is only on this device. If you run this app on a different device, it will start from zero because there's no connectivity between the installation on different devices. Yep, sure, yeah. So are there any questions about what I just demonstrated today? It's all being recorded, so the actual details of how to do this is not really the important part. The important part is the concept. We talked about event handlers, okay? By default, the application doesn't do a single thing, okay? It just sits there with all the GUI stuff if you want to, but it doesn't do a single thing. If you wanted to do something, you have to say, oh, by the way, this is going to trigger that action. Okay, pressing a button, long pressing a button, okay, changing something in the text box, okay, something has to start something, okay, an event has to start a block. Then you can put into the block what you want to do. I haven't really talked about conditional statements or something, anything like that yet. We talked about variables, how to change a variable, how to refer to the value of a variable. But the variable is what we call volatile, which means when you close the application, the value of the variable is gone. The next time you start the application, you start from scratch. Well, that may not be what you want to do. If you want something to be stored between shutting down and restarting the application, TinyDB1 or TinyDB is the thing that you want. Okay, that's the component that you want in order to store stuff between closing and restarting an application. So those are the key concepts that we talk about during the lab time. This is the part where it's kind of hands-on. What I want you guys to do before we meet again next Monday is really just to go through the inventory of what you can do. Okay, you don't have to do any actual programming if you don't feel comfortable with it, but I do want you to go through all the things that we can do. Okay, go through the user interface and find out what kind of stuff you can do. If you don't understand a particular concept, what do we do? Look at the screen right here. What do you do when you say, I'm not really quite sure what is a notifier? What do you do? Question mark, yes. Click the question mark, it gives you, a brief description. If that is not enough, at the end of the description, click more information. It brings you to a full web page related to that particular component. Gives you examples, okay? Shows you all the concepts related to that particular component, okay? You want to look at layout is not really that important, but for those of you who want to actually make an application that make use of devices or sensors on the device, go to sensors. Find out what you can do with the accelerometer meter, okay, which detects motion. So maybe I don't want the Costco person to have to press the screen the whole time, okay? Maybe a little shake, okay? A little shake is going to increase the count. How do we do that? Click on, accelerometer, okay? Find out what you can do with that. Clock is interesting because it doesn't just keep track of time. It also has a timer feature. In other words, you can say, in 5 seconds, give me an event. Then you can specify how to handle that particular event, which means now you can set up your application to do something periodically without someone actually clicking, doing any type of interaction. It just automatically do something every 5 seconds, every second, every 100 milliseconds. Okay, you can specify the interval. Okay, that's the sort of thing you can do with clock. Location sensor is GPS. Okay, you can tell basically. You can say, where am I? Then based on where you are, you can do something about it. There is a way to link location sensor to Google Map. Okay, so you can integrate Google Map into your application, even through App Inventor, which can be handy. Okay, let's see. Under media, some of you may want to take a look at this because you do have access to the camera and the camcorder. You cannot process the pictures that you have taken. Okay, so it's not like you can do a you cannot do all kinds of photo editing. That's not what you can do. But you can take a picture and refer to the image as a file. You can do something with the file, upload it, okay, delete it, redisplay it, stuff like that. Same thing with sound recorder. You cannot process the audio file, but you can do the recording, you can store, you can replay it. Okay? You can also pre-record something and distribute it with your application. So if your idea is to do a tuner application, you can pre-record tunes at 440 Hertz, which is an A in the scale, and then you can just have a button to play that sound. Okay? So go through social media. Okay, it does have a social connectivity, which is basically not this one, social. There we go. So you can go through this one. You have some control over texting. I wouldn't do it with your actual phone because it will take over. All your text will go to your application when it's running. But potentially that is something that you can do. You can also use this to send out text. Your application can be used to send text. Okay? It might be helpful, but it might also rack up your text bill. If you don't have an unlimited plan, if your program is not behaving and it just keeps texting all the time in the background and you don't know about it, next month you may be surprised. How come my bill this month is $2,000 of texting? How can I possibly send out 3,000 texts in an hour? Well, it's because it's automated. Your program is doing it. Okay. You can specify how to share something, by email, text, and stuff like that. It gives you control over that. So just kind of browse through. Don't do really a whole lot of research. You don't have to do any programming. Just kind of browse to find out what tools are available to your app, and then think about what you want your project to do. Okay, just kind of do an inventory of the features, but focus on what your app is going to accomplish. Okay, so that's what I want you guys to do over the weekend. No heavy-duty programming just yet, but a lot of planning, a lot of surveying at this point. Any questions? No questions? Let's have lunch. Well, you guys have lunch. I have a class. See you guys on Monday. Have a nice weekend.
Sorry?